everybody. My name's Iman and I'll be chairing tonight's event. We're going to start off with a few verses from the Holy Quran, and I'll be doing the English translation for you, and Ismail will be reading the Arabic.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم واعبدوا الله ولا تشركوا به شيئا وبالوالدين إحسانا وبذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين والجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب والصاحب بالجنب وابن السبيل والصاحب بالجنب وابن السبيل وما ملكت أيمانكم إن الله لا يحب من كان مختالا فخورا الذين يبخلون ويأمرون الناس بالبخل ويكتمون ما آتاهم الله من فضله وأعتدنا للكافرين عذابا مهينا والذين ينفقون أموالهم رئاء الناس ولا يؤمنون بالله ولا باليوم الآخر ومن يكن الشيطان له قرينا فساء قرينا وماذا عليهم لو آمنوا بالله واليوم الآخر وأنفقوا مما رزقهم الله وكان الله بهم عليما إن الله لا يظلم مثقال ذرة وإن تك حسنة يضاعفها ويؤت من لدنه أجرا عظيما.
If you'd like to follow along on the handout, you've got the English translation there for you as well. In the name of God, the compassionate and the merciful. Worship Allah and associate nothing with Him, and to parents do good, and to relatives, orphans, the needy, the near neighbour, the neighbour farther away, the companion at your side, the traveller, and those whom your right hands possess. Indeed, Allah does not like those who are self-deluding and boastful, who are stingy and enjoin upon other people's stinginess, and conceal what Allah has given them of His bounty, and we have prepared for the disbelievers a humiliating punishment. And also those who spend of their wealth to be seen by the people, and believe not in Allah nor in the last day. And he to whom Satan is a companion, then evil is he as a companion. And what harm would come upon them if they believed in Allah in the last day, and spent out of what Allah provided for them, and Allah is ever about them knowing. Indeed, Allah does not do injustice, even as much as an atom's weight, while if there is a good deed, He multiplies it and gives from Himself a great reward. Before we start, I'd like to thank we'd all like to thank the Thesaurus Islamic Foundation for the exhibition. If you haven't already had a chance to look at the exhibition, you can have a look at the end, or there will be a talk tomorrow by the artist. He'll be talking about his art and what inspired him to do those beautiful pieces of art. Today's speaker will be Brother Idris Tawfiq. Brother Idris is a writer and broadcaster who speaks to both Muslims and non-Muslims in the West about Islam. He has a degree in English literature and language, as well as in sacred theology, and worked as head of religious studies in various schools around the UK for some time. After spending 5 years of his life at the Vatican, a series of events led Brother Idris to convert to Islam. Before we start, we'd just like to mention that Brother Idris's books will be on sale after the event, and we've also got a few other things as well outside for sale. Others are handouts and booklets that you can just take for free. Brother Idris will be talking tonight about how Muslims can contribute to British society. Please feel free to take the stage.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wassalam ala ashraf al-mursaleen Sayyid Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most compassionate, all praise be to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. Peace and blessings of Allah be upon his final messenger Muhammad. And may the peace and the blessings and the mercy of Allah, of God Almighty, be upon each one who's here this evening. Once again, I have to say, you honor me, you really honor me by inviting me to speak in this beautiful city, in your beautiful university. And for giving up your evening on such a cold night as this, when all sorts of other things lie in store on Valentine's night. You come and listen. In fact, one of the sisters tells me she received 10 red roses, or a dozen red roses. One of the sisters. I don't think we need to go into that anymore. So clearly Valentine's is alive and well in Cambridge, and you honour me by inviting me today. Today's talk is a bit different to the sort of talk I normally give, and it's different to last night. Last night I talked about my journey to Islam. I like to concentrate on what touches the heart. You know, although I travel all over the world talking about Islam, I don't like to think of myself in any way as a lecturer giving lectures about Islam. You know, talk is easy. Anyone can talk. Anyone can give a talk and bore people to death. You know, but I think it's more important that even if one heart is touched, well, something has been achieved. So I'm going to say something I said last night. Forgive me for repeating something I said last night. I recognized faces from last night, but I'm going to repeat something very important before I speak about Muslims in Britain. And I believe this with all my heart. I don't know why. I said this last night. I don't know why, of all the places on the face of the earth, I'm here in Cambridge tonight. You know, I could be in all manner of places. I could be giving a talk in Bahrain, or in London, at Imperial College, or where I was last week, or in San Francisco, or Sydney, or South Africa. But I find myself tonight in Cambridge. I don't know why I'm here. Of all the places I could be, this is where I am tonight. But I do know with utter certainty, utter certainty, that Allah Almighty, God Almighty, who created the heavens and the earth and everything in between, planned from the beginning of time that I would be here tonight, talking to you. And I would invite you to consider this evening, you know, for whatever brought you here. You came to look at beautiful things, maybe that's why you thought you came. Well, I'd invite you to think that Allah Almighty, God Almighty, from the beginning of time, planned that you too would be here tonight, for whatever reason. I don't know what his reason was that brought us together. It could be there's someone here who really doesn't like Islam at all. And they're sitting there, you know, grinding their teeth, waiting for the chance for a harsh question. I don't know. Maybe by something that might be said, or by a greeting someone might give, someone's heart might change a little towards Islam. I don't know. It could be that there's a Muslim here tonight who hasn't prayed for a long time, who's very far from her religion or his religion. And Allah has brought you here tonight. He's brought us all here tonight, and me all the way from Cairo, so that you come back to him and start praying again. I don't know why we're here. And it could be that my words are the least important thing of tonight. But I'm sure they are. Beautiful things to inspire you at the back, you know. I don't know why you're here. Socrates, I've repeated it 1,000 times each time I come to Cambridge. Socrates says the unexamined life is not worth living. We should all the time ask ourselves, why do we pray? Why did I get up today? Why have I come to the talk? Why? All the time ask. And don't just ask, but wait for the answer. Don't just move on to the next question. So tonight, ask yourself, why are you really here? I wonder why Allah brought me here. I don't go to talks about Islam. What am I doing here? You know, why are you here? You're a Muslim. You don't go to talks. You're not a religious maniac. What are you doing here tonight? Ask yourself the question. So that's how I want you to bear that in mind. And we're talking about, you know, it's not a spiritual thing, but I'll try and guide it towards the spiritual towards the end. We're talking about how can British Muslims contribute to society, or how can Muslims contribute to British society. And the way I thought we'd do it, we look at today's perception of Muslims. We'll talk a little about Islam in the West, how Muslims can respond to this situation, and what do they actually have to offer. But I want to begin by telling you about Metropolitan Nicholas of Detroit. I was telling you last night, I met 2 years ago the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew I, and got on very well, and his personal secretary added me as a friend on Facebook. And a few months later, I visited the States for a tour of New York State. I visited there, and then a few months later, I did a tour of the Midwest. Chicago, Detroit, Milwaukee, and some other places. And wherever I go, I like to extend a hand of friendship to non-Muslims. So, for example, tomorrow when I arrive in Nottingham, I go from the train station to meet the Lord Mayor of Nottingham. Last night, the Mayor of Cambridge came to the talk. To extend a hand of friendship and to say, on behalf of Muslims, I want to greet you and wish you well, and say that Muslims want to be a part of the society where they live. It's their country. They want to play their full part. Now, for Detroit, I saw on the internet there was a Metropolitan Archbishop of the Greek Orthodox Church, but I couldn't find any contact details. So I contacted my friend on Facebook and said, can you give me some contact information for Metropolitan Nicholas of Detroit? And he got back and said, His Eminence, the Archbishop, is waiting for me. It's all been set up. So I went to see him, and we had again a lovely talk. I began by saying, sir, you honour me and you honour all Muslims by this meeting. And I simply want to say that Muslims want to extend a hand of friendship to those who are not Muslim. We're comfortable with people who are not Muslim. We respect the beliefs of others. And he said, oh, that's not my experience. And I said, oh, please tell me. And we talked, and he told me about an awful experience he had in Istanbul when he was visiting the Patriarch. And he said that when the Patriarch, by the way, is the equivalent to the Pope in Rome, to the Eastern Church. He's a big, big fish. And that they were in the limousine, the patriarchal limousine, and they got out into the street, and the car was surrounded by a mob of people, all Muslim, and they were banging the top of the car and shaking the car. And Metropolitan Nicholas said to the Patriarch, because he was terrified for his life, what are we going to do? And the Patriarch said, oh, this happens a lot, we'll just have to wait, they'll go away in the end. And I felt ashamed. You know, I'd gone with all these nice ideas of what I was going to say to him, and Muslims love everyone, and we get on well, and he'd said, well, that isn't my experience. So I want us to begin by making a clear distinction between Islam and Muslims. That's very important. Just as you'd make a distinction between Christianity and Christians, or Buddhists and Buddhism, there's a distinction. Islam, I believe, is perfect. Islam has existed since the beginning of time, and as a Muslim, I believe that it's the natural religion of mankind, which is for all people and speaks to the hearts of all. Muslims, however, are not perfect. So, if we're talking about what can Muslims contribute to British society, my answer is Islam. That's what they can contribute. Islam, in Egypt, we have a group, and they say Islam huwa al-hal. Islam is the answer. Islam is the answer. But sometimes Muslims are the problem, not the answer. So we have to make, we'll look at this as we go on. I want to read something first. This first of my books is called Gardens of Delight, A Simple Introduction to Islam. It's about the 5 pillars of Islam in very simple language for Muslims and for non-Muslims. You've only to turn on a television set in any part of the Western Hemisphere to be very soon perfectly convinced that Islam is the religion of terrorism. Muslims feel that after the horrifying events of September the 11th in the United States, or the terrible bombings in Madrid or London or Sharm el-Sheikh, that there's not an explosion or a loud noise to be heard in any large city, be it the result of a leaking gas pipe or a car exhaust backfiring, and all eyes will look to Islam as its cause. They believe that the very name Islamic has become associated in many people's minds with suicide bombs and suspicious characters intent on evil. Wearing the Muslim veil, far from being a symbol of modesty, has become for many a symbol of the oppression of women, of extreme religious bias. So where has this image come from that makes Islam seem so violent, so aggressive, so uncompromising in its dealings with others? Daily news coverage brings to our screens images of extreme violence from Iraq and Palestine. Arabs boarding any plane feel that they're looked upon with suspicious eyes, not only by airport security but by passengers too, fearing for their own safety they could be carrying concealed weapons. And yet, Muslims say, when IRA violence was at its height in Northern Ireland in the 70s and 80s, no one spoke about Roman Catholic terrorists. The Roman Catholic Church wasn't singled out for criticism. When the Basque separatist group ETA have carried out attacks in the Basque region of northern Spain, no one talks about Christian terrorists. So why Islam? The day after September the 11th, September the 12th, there was a big headline in the Daily Mirror. Now, admittedly not the world's greatest newspaper, but Daily Mirror, and the print was in white against a black background. So it looked very sinister. You know, the whole front page was black. And in bold white letters against a black background, it said, Islam is not the religion of evil. Okay? Very clear from the Daily Mirror. Islam is not the religion of evil. But I thought to myself, God, this is very clever. Because no one ever said it was. No one until today has ever suggested it was the religion of evil. But by you writing it on your front page, you're putting it into people's minds that maybe it is. Very subtle, very clever. I don't know what their intention was in providing such a headline, but that set the trend then for, well, we've lived with it since. Living in Egypt, Muslims in Egypt say to me, why do people in the West hate Islam? The question asked me all the time, why do people in the West hate Islam? And I say, they don't. What are you talking about? They don't hate Islam. No, they say, why does everyone in the West hate Islam? And my reply is that everyone doesn't. It would seem to, before we get on to our main theme, it would seem to me that there are 4 groups in the West, Britain included in the West, who have an opinion about Islam. First of all, we have newspapers looking for a story. If in Cambridge today, there were 100 cars on the road there, passing between 12 and 1, and one of the cars has an accident and knocks someone down, the headline in the local newspaper isn't going to be 99 cars have no accident today. The headline will be car accident. It's what the newspapers are looking for, something interesting. Well, so it is with events in the Muslim world, the so-called Muslim world. A bomb goes off and that makes the headline. But no one mentions in the newspaper that many hundreds of thousands of little old ladies that day taught their granddaughters how to recite Quran. They didn't mention that. You know, they didn't mention that many hundreds of thousands, millions of Muslims prayed 5 times a day. They didn't mention that. But what was in the newspaper is a headline. So, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. So there's one group in the news that's looking for a story. It's their job to look for stories. But unfortunately, the stories are coming from, for whatever reason, from parts of the so-called Muslim world. Another group, politicians looking for a scapegoat. You know, if the economy is not doing too well and you want to divert attention away from your own shortcomings, you look for someone to blame. Now, in the last century, the start of the last century, Irish Catholics were pointed as the no Catholic need apply here. Catholics were looked upon as the problem, coming, taking our jobs, and coming, being a burden on the state. At the present time, many politicians very subtly point to Islam. When the media train moves on, they'll pick on someone else. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. There's another group, I'm perfectly convinced, do hate Islam. Very tiny little group. Hate Islam with a perfect hatred. When I came in November to speak at the debate at the Cambridge Union, this house believes that Islam is a threat to the West. The people speaking against us really hated Islam with a perfect hatred. But they're a tiny, tiny, tiny little group. And the vast majority of people in this country and the West, I would say, really, they don't know anything about Islam at all. Why would they? Would you know anything about Buddhism? Do you really? I don't know much about it. Why would I? Why would ordinary people know anything about Islam except what they hear on the TV or read in the newspapers? So 4 groups, but the biggest group of all is of people who don't really know anything about Islam. All they learn about Islam is from Muslims. Now let me just stray away from what I've got written down. Aisha, who was one, I'll be pleased with her, one of the Prophet's wives, she used to describe Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You know, she was like, what was he like? She said, he was a walking Quran. A walking Quran. So a challenge for the Muslims here tonight, is that what they say about you? Is that what the people of Cambridge say about you? Do the people, there aren't all that many Muslims here in the city, I guess, at the university. Do people point to you in the street outside King's College and say, look, there's a Muslim? How can you tell it's a Muslim? Not by the way they dress, but you can tell it's a Muslim because they're honest men and women. They're people of prayer and faith. They're trustworthy. They're good. They love their parents. You know, they're honest. They're kind. They're loyal to their friends. Is that what they say? I don't know. I leave that as the question for you to answer. I guess the answer is no. They don't really say. But maybe they do. So Islam in the West, just a few words about different countries in the West before we can suggest what Muslims do. Take Ireland, for example. As an example, I want to tell you about Ireland. In the 1950s, there were no Muslims in Ireland, really. A few dozen. And then Muslims began to travel to Ireland to study from Malaysia and Saudi Arabia, to study as doctors at the Royal College of Surgeons. And they went to study aeronautics. And the people of Ireland was very poor at the time. And the people of Ireland didn't know anything about Islam. These Muslims, they didn't know anything about them at all. All they knew was that these foreigners, these foreign Muslims were coming, contributing something to Irish society. They're coming being doctors, and many of them stayed. You know, and the people were pleased that the country was getting more doctors, and more engineers, and more architects. They built up the country. And so Islam had a very good introduction in Ireland. But then in the late 80s and 90s, things began to change. And refugees started coming to Ireland. And asylum seekers started coming to Ireland. And they came with no money, and they didn't have great qualifications. And they weren't particularly clever. They were wanting something from Ireland. And people's perceptions began to change, and they began to look at Islam differently. Now I suggest to you, we need to bear that in mind, you know. Let me give you another thought. I may have mentioned this last night. Switzerland, I can't remember if I did. In Switzerland, the people of Switzerland recently, relatively recently, voted to ban the building of minarets in Switzerland. There were 4. There were 4 minarets in the entire country. But through a very concerted campaign from a right-wing political party, people were persuaded that Islam was a threat to the Swiss way of life. The man who led that party, or who led the campaign, has since become Muslim. So he's seen the error of what he was telling the people. But you see, it seems to me what happened was this. Switzerland is famous for what? It's famous for clocks and chocolate and mountains and being very clean of the banks, being neutral. Doesn't set the world on fire, really, Switzerland. It's a very quiet kind of a country. And then all of a sudden, over the mountains, hordes of foreigners start coming with their suitcases and their families and no work and no money and no visa, and they come and live in the country and they can't speak the language, and they start introducing some of their foreign ways from different foreign lands. And the people of Switzerland are whipped up into a frenzy by these groups saying, look, this is Islam. Well, this isn't Islam at all. This is immigration. This is an immigration problem. And at the time I wrote to the Swiss ambassador in Cairo and I said, look, if your country has a problem with immigration, sort it out. But don't blame Islam. You understand? You understand the distinction. There's a distinction all the time. And it's in France. Big problems in France. You know, people sneaking over the Straits of Gibraltar in little boats to get there, or maybe with no job, with no money. Vast hordes of people now in the south of France, not really considering themselves French at all, and looking to North Africa as their real home. And you know, dressing in a way that French people think is alien. Is that Islam? Is Islam the problem? Or is immigration the problem that's not been sorted out? From both sides. I'm not criticizing the French. I'm saying there is a problem there that needs to be dealt with. Muslims too need to address it. But the problem isn't Islam. The USA and Canada, they don't have a problem like that, because to get to Canada, you need money to start with. You can't sneak into Canada on a boat. You can't just turn up at the border with your suitcase. You've got to pay a lot of money to get there. And you only get a visa if you're intelligent and you've got enough to do, you've got a qualification or a business. I mean, the Canadian ambassador in Cairo said to me, Muslims on the whole in Canada are better educated than most Canadians. So in Canada, they don't have this perception of immigrants. In fact, Canada looks for immigrants. But just recently, again, you have these political groups looking for scapegoats, and they've started picking on the Muslim veil, on the hijab, as being somehow different to the Canadian way of life. And there's a spark there of trouble. But again, it's not Islam. Islam isn't the problem. Islam is beautiful and gentle and sweet. If Muslims, for whatever reason, are a problem, it needs to be sorted out. So we have a problem. When I was in Ireland, for example, I went for a tour in Ireland. FOSIS invited me 2 years ago, just an Ireland tour, and I visited all the universities in Ireland. And I met all the mayors and lord mayors in Ireland. And the Archbishop of Dublin was the first person I met. And I did a radio show on the first morning with a man called Jerry Ryan. He was the most kind of Terry Wogan type guy. It was a breakfast show with music and laughter. And we talked for an hour. And it was great. It was great crack, as they say. You know, we were talking and laughing and joking. And people were allowed to call in. And this lady rang in and she said, I'd like to know one thing. Yes, I said, please tell me. She said, have you come to Ireland to convert the whole of Ireland to Islam? My dear, I said, I haven't come to convert anyone to anything. I've come to encourage the Muslims to be good Muslims, and I've come to encourage tolerance and understanding and respect between Muslims and those who aren't. And thank God, Jerry Ryan said, oh, your heart's in the right place, Idris. And the people of Ireland, the millions listening, heard that message. So immigration is one thing, Islam is something else. Now what can Muslims do? How can Muslims do? And the same in Britain. We have exactly the same problems in Britain. We have, you know, after the war, vast numbers of people were invited. They were invited. They didn't just turn up at the door. They were invited to come from the Indian subcontinent to do jobs that British people wouldn't do at the time. They were invited to come. They didn't just turn up and say, you've got to take us, like an invading army. They were asked. And then others came from other parts of the world, from East and West Africa at different stages, asked to come. They were invited to come. They didn't sneak in. They were invited. They came by plane. And now we have a situation which is, it's not good. You know, whatever the Prime Minister's motive was in talking last week about multiculturalism having failed, he was right. It has totally failed. It's totally failed in this country. This country, certainly, it's cosmopolitan for sure. You know, there's every language and every dish you could imagine, curry and pizza and everything you'd want. But multicultural implies a respect for other people's beliefs and way of life, a respect. And it seems to me all we've managed to achieve in this country is tolerance. We managed to tolerate one another with a smile on our faces. But when push comes to shove and there's a problem, the underlying problem comes out. And we haven't moved from tolerance to respect. You know, you can tolerate a fly. A fly can be flying around and you can put up with a fly, but you don't respect a fly. So it seems to me that this multicultural idea, it hasn't worked for whatever reason. So what can Muslims do? They've got two choices. They can either be a part of this Britain, or they can stay apart from this Britain. If they stay apart, they say to themselves, we don't want our Muslim identity to be taken away from us. You know, Islam is important to us. We want to remain Muslim. And this is a very important thing. Danger in that, though, is that, you know, you can mistake Islam. We don't want Islam to be taken away from us. We can mistake that for we don't want Pakistan to be taken away from us. Bear with me. I'm not offending anyone, you know. You can be Pakistani as much as you want in your house. When I'm in Egypt, when I close the door of the flat, I drink tea with milk from a china cup, okay? When I go out in the street, I drink tea with no milk and 5 sugars in a glass. I'm Egyptian on the street, you know, I talk Egyptian. It still drives me crazy when I have to go to the post office and there's no queue. And I'm British and I say, I need a queue, it's my turn. And all these people are milling around. But you have to blend in. You know, I can't insist on British ways in the country I've chosen to live in. Because I've chosen to live somewhere else. So it seems to me, and I hope I'm not offending anyone, you don't throw me out, but it seems to me the choice is, it's Islam that we want to preserve, not being Pakistani or Algerian. You know, be those things in your home. Good, no problem, be whatever you want in your house. Even, you know, celebrate parts of what used to be your home at times. But British Muslims are British. They're British people, you know, but they're British Muslims. They're Muslim. It's the Muslim part that's the important thing, not the fact that their great-granddad came from Bengal. Alhamdulillah, he did, and celebrate that. But you can't insist on that, because people won't like it. You know, I gave a talk in Bradford a year or two ago. In Bradford University, 40% of the students are Muslim. 40% of the university. And everywhere you look, there are girls in veils, and everyone's got coloured faces. And I thought to myself, wow, what must the white people of Bradford think living in this setup? You know, ask yourself, be honest, let's be honest, okay? Thank God tomorrow I'm leaving by train, I can get out quick. I'm just putting some ideas for you to think about. The unexamined life is not worth living, you know? Think about it. What image are Muslims giving to British people? I'm kind of putting the bad side first before coming to the good side. So the choice is either stay apart from this. When I embraced Islam 10 years ago, first of all, I prayed in Regent's Park Mosque in central London, because that's where I accepted Islam, and that's where I felt comfortable. I knew the people there. And even though it was 3 or 4 stops away on the Jubilee line, I used to go there to pray, because I knew everyone, and I was in my comfort zone. But after some months, I said, this is ridiculous. You can't keep going all that way just to pray when there's a mosque 100 yards down the road. So I said, I'll start praying in that mosque instead. So I went to this mosque. Now this mosque belonged to a particular ethnic group. I won't mention any ethnic group. And I went for the evening prayer, for the night prayer, Salat al-Isha, and I walked in the door. And I said, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Assalamu alaikum. And everyone turned and stared at me. No one replied, they just stared at me. And I went and I prayed, and I felt very uncomfortable. And when it was finished, I put my hand out to shake hand, and no one shook my hand back. And I got out as quick as I could, and I never went back. And, you know, and there were people in that mosque who couldn't speak a word of English. And I thought, that's very sad, that's really sad. And you know, I travel apart from traveling all over the world, I travel all over Britain, and sometimes I visit Muslim communities, and it's like taking a step back in time. You know, where the women are at home, they can't speak English, they stay at home. That can't be good, can it? That can't be good. And attitudes are like something from the 1950s. And people think of home as somewhere else. So the choice is, stay apart from this wicked country where you've chosen to live. Stay apart from that. Or be a part of it. But being a part of it has its dangers, you know, because by being a part of it, the danger is you become a part of different things that Muslims aren't really a part of. Valentine's Day. You know, we've no interest in Valentine's Day as Muslims, none at all. We have a different way of thinking about relationships, and Valentine's Day is not part of it. You know, buy some flowers, sure, but the whole concept of relationships that's grown up in this country now is not part of the Muslim way of thinking. It just isn't. It's anathema to Muslims. But still, we can be part. So, oh yeah, the debate that I spoke in November, is Islam a threat to the West? Well, I suggested then, and I suggest to you now, that Islam isn't a threat to anyone. Islam, in fact, is a blessing to the West. Islam is a blessing to this country of Britain, if only it were given a chance. Two ways. A chance by the people of Britain, and a chance by the Muslims. You know, in London once, I was being driven home after a talk, and we went through one allegedly Muslim area of London, and we passed a restaurant, and it said above the door, it said, fully licensed halal restaurant. Now, if you're not Muslim, perhaps you don't understand. The food in it was halal, but Muslim restaurants don't sell alcohol. But this one was fully licensed, and I thought to myself, but what kind of image is that giving to people? You know, what are we playing at? We're either Muslim or we're not. Let's not pretend. You know? So, is Islam a threat? It isn't a threat. But Muslims have to play their part and show the real Islam. Show what Islam is really like. It's a two-way game. You know, one of the problems is, you know, I talk to young Muslims a lot, university students, young professionals, and if I brought a little puppy in here, and the puppy came, come on, that's a good little boy, and the puppy came, and when I kicked it in the face, it would run off squealing, okay? And then no, come on, that's a good little boy, and it came again, and I kicked it again the next time it came. The third time, it would be loath to go. It's not stupid. Well, the same can happen, you know, if all the time people are pointing fingers at you and saying, Muslim. You know, eventually, you keep your mouth shut. You don't talk about, I've seen lots of Muslims in Cambridge. They're not here tonight. Maybe the Valentine's dance. Because they've kind of decided it's best to keep your mouth shut and to be a part of things, rather than to stick your neck out and have you be hit on the head. No one wants to be hit on the head. And if you're always being hit on the head, you keep your mouth shut and keep your Islam to yourself. You know, as a man you can do it. The sisters, it's more difficult if they wear a veil. The men can get away with it. So the question is, what does Islam have to offer? You know, when those cartoons came out of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, showing him with a hand grenade or whatever in his head here, it caused a lot of outrage in the Muslim world. That's another talk. But at the time, the Queen of Denmark was overheard. Her microphone was left on at the end of a talk. And she was kind of this distance away talking to someone. And she talked about those people for whom religion is everything. She was talking about Muslims. those people for whom religion is everything. And I think this is the crux of it. It seems to me, you know, I'll be honest with you, it's my country, but it seems to me that Britain has lost its way. Britain has lost a sense of the spiritual. Britain has lost the moral sense it once had. Shoot me down, but I honestly think that. And Britain is still flailing around trying to find where it's going, which way, you know, it's still pretending to be important on the world stage, which is ludicrous. Forget that, that's a political, but leave that out. Lots of the values that people cherish have gone. Okay? So when the Queen of Denmark can talk about those people for whom religion is everything, for someone in Denmark, seeing a woman in a veil, if you've got no religion, or religion isn't really important to you, you see someone in a veil, and if your religion isn't important, you must say to yourself, well, there's either two things here. Either she's a religious maniac, or she's being made to wear it. Her husband has forced her to wear that veil. What else makes sense? Because the religious option just isn't there. So if you live in a society where religion is gone, you know, the Archbishop of York said a year or two ago, he said there are more Muslims pray on a Friday than there are people go to church on a Sunday in this country. Well, it's either good or bad, it's up to you to make it. But that's the way Britain is. Britain has changed. Before this talk, I went to choral evensong at Great St. Mary's. Didn't threaten my faith, it was beautiful. But there were only two of us in the congregation. There was one lady and a Muslim. And I thought, the poor vicar. Oh no, but then the congregation doubled when two tramps came in. And then they talked throughout the sermon. But really, that's very sad. It's very sad. And and it's sad for all people of faith. It's sad for Muslims. It's sad for Muslims that the church is empty. You know, when the Archbishop of Canterbury speaks, people laugh. He's vilified in the press, made a fool of. You know, religion has been reduced here to the Vicar of Dibley, the Sound of Music, Oh Brother, Blue Nun Wine, bit of a joke. You know, when I was a priest, I was a Roman Catholic priest, I know full well that you'd enter once you got out of your comfort zone of the parish, people would look at you as if to say, did he drop out of the sky? And that's the way people look upon religious people in this country. It's a bit odd. A bit odd. So what? I'm running out of time of what Muslims can do. What do they have to offer? Well, they have to offer Islam. What do I mean they have to offer Islam? I don't mean rules and regulations. Rules and regulations without the essence of anything have no meaning. So we have to look for, rules and regulations are very important. Please don't say I'm doing away with rules and regulations. I'm not. Rules and regulations keep a community together, and they keep a community focused. So rules are very important. But without the spirit of the rules, you know, let me say to the Muslims, for example, you know, someone says to you, are you coming to the Valentine's dance tonight? I can't, I'm Muslim. You know? You're coming to the pub, do you want to come for a drink? I can't, I'm Muslim. But he can't, he's Muslim, he can't, but he doesn't know why. No one's ever told him why. All he knows is he can't do anything that's fun, he's not allowed to do. That's his understanding of Islam. Well, Islam is beautiful. Islam would put a smile on your face and a spring in your step. It's gentle, and it would make grown men weep with joy. With tears of joy, it's so beautiful. But many Muslims themselves haven't tasted its beauty. Prophet Muhammad said that the one who hasn't tasted the sweetness and goodness of Islam in this life will not taste its sweetness and goodness in the next. And I think he meant Muslims, you know. There are many Muslims, may Allah bless them all, who live according to the rules of Islam, and their lives are very harsh. You know, and their foreheads are... Let me tell you a story. I've not got much time, but for me, this sums up Islam. This sums up what Islam has to offer. I was in Medina, in Saudi Arabia. I was there in Medina for Umrah, the lesser pilgrimage. I was in the Prophet's Mosque, peace be upon him, in the afternoon. And the afternoon prayer was over, so I was just sitting quietly. A mosque isn't like a church. You know, you don't wear hats and gloves and speak in hushed tones. You can talk to your friends. You can lie down and go to sleep. You can eat your lunch. You know, it's a place of community gathering as well as of prayer. So I sat there and I was thinking my thoughts and making dua for those I love, praying for those I love. And a man came in with his 4 sons. Now the way he was dressed, he was from somewhere in the former Soviet Union, something Istan, Kyrgyzstan or something. He was dressed like that with a long turban down his back. And his face was lined with severity, very severe. And the 4 boys came in after him, this high, this high, this high, this high. And he walked in very severely, and they followed him, copied him exactly as they walked in. And they lined up to pray, and he led his boys in prayer, and they prayed. And I thought, first of all, if only the world could see this, you know. This man wants to bring up his kids as good men, you know, as honest men who pray, and who are trustworthy, and good people. And the boys respect and love their father so much that they want to be like him, they want to copy him. Well, after that thought, they all lay on the floor to go to sleep for a while. So they lay there. 2 minutes later, the youngest of all, he was only about 6, he couldn't keep still. So I watched them. And the little one, he started tickling his father's toes. And after another minute, all 5 of them, they were rolling around on the floor, cuddling and kissing and laughing and joking. And I thought, if only people could see Islam. This is Islam too. You know, fun and joy and love and care. This is Islam too. What does Islam have to offer this country? It has to offer a sense of family. Family is very important. Marriage is very important. Relationships are just different in Islam. They're just totally different. You know, I was telling someone earlier today, in the internet place I go to in Cairo, it's in a poor area, the boy, Mustafa's called Mustafa. One day he came to me and he said, Ustaz Idris, you won't see me anymore. I said, why? He said, I'm leaving, I have to leave. I have a problem. I said, okay, why don't we, I thought this is a walking up and down the street time. I said, let's go out, we'll have a talk about this. So we went out, I said, so Mustafa, what's the problem? He said, I'm in love. I said, what are you talking about, you silly boy? This isn't Paris. You're in love. What are you talking about? You're in love. Oh, I'm in love with a girl. I said, does your dad know about the girl? No. Does your mum know about the girl? No. Does she wear the veil? Yes, she does. So we talked more and more. A week later, he wasn't in love anyway. Forgot all about the thing. But the whole relationship thing, it's different. It's just different. It's about choosing someone who will be your life's partner. Choosing someone who will be the father of your children. Someone who will be the mother of your children, who will support you and love you and look after you and care for you, confide in you all your life. That's what relationships are about in Islam. And flirting around before that just has no part to play. It has no part to play at all. There's a lovely, when I lived in Damascus, I'm going to run over, I'm afraid, because when I lived in Damascus, there's a young man I knew, and he said to me, Idris, I'm getting married. Oh, that's great. Who are you marrying? Oh, I'm marrying so-and-so. Oh, I see. How did you meet her? My mother chose her for me. I said, oh, do you love her? He said, I loved her the moment my mother told me I was going to marry her. And it was true, he did. It's very romantic, but it's just totally different to the system. And he loved her. He really, really loved her. Egyptians, you know when a boy is engaged to be married, because he listens to Abdul Halim music and goes all gooey-eyed, you can tell straight away. They have this romantic notion of marriage, you know. And say better or worse, you know, marriages don't break down. They don't. Do you know, in this country in 2008, there were 210,000 abortions. 210, that can't be good. That can't be, you can talk about a woman's right to choose or whatever, but it can't be good that 200,000 little babies were killed. That can't be right. And you know that most children born in this country now, their parents are not married, most children. And most marriages in this country break up. That can't be good. There's something gone wrong somewhere. So I've run out of time. What can Islam do? It can introduce moral values. It can introduce marriage and family values. It can respect the old. You come to Cairo and you'll see a boy crossing the road, lad of 18, and he's holding his dad's hand, crossing the road. And you go to Damascus. I remember once I was at the airport in Damascus, and the pilgrims were coming back from the Hajj pilgrimage, and they're all waiting with trumpets and drums. You know, the dad would come through and drums, and they'd welcome them with cheering and clapping. And one man came through, a very old man, and he was dressed in white, and his son must have been in his 30s. And I wept when I saw the scene. The father appeared through the gate, and the boy, the man, he ran over, and he went down on the floor, and he kissed his father's feet. And he said, "Father, forgive me for any time in my life I've upset you." But that's Islam. It's very beautiful. And the dad picked him up and loved him and hugged him. That's gone in this country. You know, if Americans could see a boy walking across the street holding his dad's hand, they'd say, "I want some of that." But it's gone. It's gone here. Islam has something to offer there. I've run out of time, so I want to read you again from this book. When Princess Diana died, I was a priest, and it was an extraordinary time to be a priest, because her death touched people's hearts in a way that we'd not seen for a long time. They didn't know her from Adam, but somehow they identified with her. She was glamorous and beautiful and new film stars. And her life had been touched by tragedy and divorce. And she was just altogether special. And when she died, you know, people were throwing flowers, and businessmen were coming out of the office with suits and laying flowers in Kensington Palace. And it seemed to me at the time that what was happening was people weren't so much mourning the death of a princess, they were mourning the death of goodness and beauty and honesty and truth and spiritual value. They were mourning all of those things that had gone, that they'd imagined and worked themselves up into this person. And just before I read the thing to finish, I was telling you last night, the one who introduced me to Islam was a little boy. It wasn't a big fancy speaker or a TV program or a book. It was a little lad with plastic flip-flops on his feet, cleaning shoes in the street, and he introduced me to Islam by saying to me, "Assalamu alaikum." That was my introduction to Islam. Mesh. And, okay, so I want to compare the little boy. I'm going to talk about the little boy and Princess Diana, because people were asking at the time, why does God allow people to die like this? You know, why does he allow the good to die young? Why does he allow little children to get cancer? Why does he allow terrible earthquakes? Well, I end the book this way. Our young boy knows the answer to all those questions about life's meaning, that little boy of 14. Islam has taught him there's no distinction for him between religion and life. He is neither weird, nor an extremist, nor a fanatic. He's just a perfectly ordinary young man trying to earn enough money to feed himself and his family. Does praying make him a fanatic, he asks? Does trying to help others less fortunate than him make him weird? Does dreaming about going on a once-in-a-lifetime pilgrimage to Mecca make him an extremist? We often fear that which we don't understand. Islam is much misunderstood in today's world. If our only knowledge of Islam comes from distorted news headlines, we're sure to live forever in fear of what we don't really know. If we can begin to see Islam through the eyes of Muslims themselves, like our young shoeshine boy, we might begin to understand. Muslims remain bewildered that their religion is not only misunderstood, but vilified as a religion of fanatics. Our young boy, Ali or Hassan or Muhammad, knows that Islam is the religion of peace. Misunderstood by many who are not Muslim, he'll carry on through the harsh realities of life, trying his best to be a good person. Several times a day he'll declare his belief in the oneness of Allah and that Muhammad, peace be upon him, is his messenger. He'll go quickly to pray when he hears Allahu Akbar from the mosque. He'll pay zakat if ever he has enough money to pay it. but he'll always think of those even less better off than he. He'll look forward all year to the coming of Ramadan, when he will fast with all his heart and soul during daylight hours. And it will be his life's dream to go on pilgrimage to Mecca in response to Allah's call. Final little section. His hope and his prayer will be that when his time on earth is over, he'll look back on a life well lived. He has lived the secret according to the principles of Islam. Now he'll hope to hear these words of the Quran as if Allah were addressing them to him alone. But thou soul at peace, return unto thy Lord, content in his good pleasure. Enter thou among my servants, enter thou my God. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
The audience will now be able to ask Brother Idris any questions. Does anyone want to go first?
Before they do, okay, we'll give them a second to answer, think of that question. I want to say something. I said it last night, but I'm unashamed in saying it, I have to say. I travel all over the world. I was accused last week of someone on Facebook. They sent me a very horrible message saying, you're a total fraud. You're only in this for the money. You're only in this for the petrodollars. I thought to myself, if only. You know? I travel all over the world, and I don't charge anything anywhere for speaking about Islam. My only source of income is the sale of my books. And wherever I go, I carry suitcases of my books so I can go back home to Egypt and pay the rent and eat and feed hungry mouths. So I brought some of my books, and it will help my work in talking about Islam and building bridges if you can buy my books. There are two big books, there's this one, and there's one about Palestine. They're £6 each. There are two small ones talking about Muslims of the West, talking to new Muslims. They're £4. If you can't afford the full price, pay whatever you can. I'm not in it for the money, but I've got to live. So, questions?
Anyone want to go first? Anybody at all? I've got one.
Okay, sister.
What made you decide to make a living out of coming and speaking to people? What made you want to inspire other Muslims and non-Muslims?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. There's no living to be made out of, I can assure you.
Oh, sorry.
Well, there isn't. The work chose me, really. I wrote this book to explain to my English friends about Islam, my English friends living in Alexandria, because they hadn't got a clue about Islam. And I'd become Muslim, and I wanted them to understand what Islam was like. So I wrote that book. No plan of doing anything but teaching English. And then someone invited me to give a talk, and someone invited me to write a thing in the newspaper, and then a radio interview, and then an interview to go to Toronto. And as God is my judge, I still say to myself, Idris, why on earth would anyone invite you to go and speak to them? Because certainly Muslims, you know more about Islam than I do. All I'm doing is just telling you what you already know, but saying it in a nice way. So the work chose me rather than I chose it. And I was telling someone earlier on, really I'm the luckiest man on earth, because even though I don't have a penny in my pocket, no bank account, you know, my work is just, I meet lovely people all over the world, the best of Muslims. You know, tomorrow I meet the Lord Mayor of Nottingham, the Bishop of Exeter, the Bishop of Liverpool, the Lord Mayor of the Vice Chancellor of Cardiff University. Many people, just, what a blessed job. It's my job to talk about Islam. You know, there's not many people, you turn up for work and people clap when you talk. It's a wonderful job, really. It's very blessed, and it feeds my faith. That's how it is. If there are no questions, we can happily, I'll sign books to your Uncle Ahmed, or your Auntie Zainab, or whoever. There's something.
You talked about instilling values into British society again. Do you think it's possible to do that in a way which doesn't come across as patronising?
Yeah, I do, very much. Yeah, I do. Life has taught me that you can say anything to anyone as long as you say it in a nice way. You know, if you're harsh in your presence, people don't want to be lectured at. They don't want to be told that they're wrong. You know, they don't want to be looked down upon or patronised. No one wants that. I don't want it. No one wants it. So, for example, I'll give you an example. In Edinburgh, I've spoken in Edinburgh for the last 5 years at the Edinburgh Festival. And I've spoken in the mosque, and I've spoken in St John's Church in Princes Street about Islam. And it's taken a long time, a lot of wasting of time, although it hasn't been wasted at all. Lots of tea has been drunk, talking to people, and just wasting seemingly endless hours, establishing relationships. And eventually, you know, the vicar of St John's Church in Princes Street, he asked me to give the sermon at choral evensong in his church. And I mounted the pulpit to all these ladies in gloves and hats, and I talked about Prophet Muhammad, but it took a long time. And they only listened to me because I'd earned their respect, you know? So it is patronising if we think we can stand on a box and say you're all wrong, you know? I'm sorry, the one on the box is wrong, talking like that. Learn a bit of humility first. You know, earn respect of the people you live with. Show them what Islam is like. Don't talk to them about Islam, show them Islam. It's no good, just anyone can talk. So it's not patronising at all if we show the people we're speaking to that we respect them. We disagree with them totally on certain things. I said last night, the Bishop of Edinburgh and myself had an event about Jesus. It was called Muslims, Christians and the Real Jesus. The Bishop spoke about Jesus from a Christian point of view. I spoke about Jesus, peace be upon him, from a Muslim point of view, and we disagreed after half a minute. But the audience of Muslim and Christian listened to us both, and at the end they saw that even though we disagreed completely, we embraced one another and went off for lunch. You know, you can be friends with people you disagree with. That's very important too. And as well, one thing, if I'd had time, I would have said that, you know, interfaith is very, very important, because people of faith have more in common with each other than they have with secular people who would do away with faith and spirituality altogether. You know, we're not competing with other people of faith. Wherever we see goodness in this world, we should embrace it. Goodness comes from God Almighty. It doesn't come from the devil. So if we see a good person, whatever her religion, you know, we embrace it. And we learn from other people too. In interfaith we can learn. Last November when I was here, invited by the Muslim Council of Wales, I met the Archbishop of Wales, Dr. Barry Morgan. Very impressive man. Very, very impressive. And he gave me a book that he'd written about the poetry of R.S. Thomas. And I went away and it really touched me. He was talking about a Christian priest talking about God. And it really touched my heart, and I learned a lot about Islam from reading his book. So we can learn too. Let's not think we're the only ones with all the goodness. There's lots of goodness around, and we too can learn from our friends. You know, so no sense of being patronising at all. I would hope, astaghfirullah, that's no patronising.
Next question. You said you answered Muslims contribute to British society, but what can British society in general offer the Muslim? I'm not British. I come from a country which is more true of being Muslim than it is being Muslim here in the United Kingdom, and
It's more difficult.
yeah, society-wise.
Okay.
And I'm going back into this, but so I just want, and I wanted to ask this question because I work with youth and kids, and I try to tell them they can be Muslims, they can still be their nationality, and it has nothing to do with being Swede or being British as a form of this nationality. Has nothing to do with religion.
Okay, so you're asking me what can Britain give to Muslims?
Yeah, what can the British society
Okay.
give to the Muslims?
Loads.
You already answered.
Loads. It can give loads. It can give professional. You know, I live in the Arab world where it's chaotic. People haven't got a clue how to queue up. They've no idea. You know, they haven't got a notion of turning up on time. You know, you say to your friend, what time will I see him? He'll see Ba'd al-Asr. Well, what time is that supposed to be, for heaven's sake? Asr is at 2:30, and he'll see me after Asr. That could be 3 or 5. You know, you make an appointment to meet at 8, and at 8:45 he will call you and say, "Ana fi tariq, I'm on the way." But which way are you on? I say, you know, because you'll be there for another hour. So this country has lots to offer in terms of professionalism, in terms of timekeeping, respecting other people's time. It's very important. Time is very precious. Hard work, very, very important value. You know, people can be lazy in other places. There are lots of things that people can offer here. Lots of education, very, very important, excellent education. We're in the finest university in the world. Education is so important here. You know, all of these values are Islamic values, by the way. But since we seem to have lost a lot of them in many of the countries that were colonized by Britain and France and caused a lot of trouble and left these countries with very little. And so, you know, I say all the time in Cairo, Mafish Nizam Abadan, there's no system. The system doesn't work. No system at all. Here there's a system that works. You know, the roads are clean. The traffic lights say stop, and you stop. You know, in the Arab world, the traffic lights are a rough guide to what you might do. You know, if you've got a chance to get through, you go to. It applies to everyone else, but not really to me. You know. So here there's a system. This is good. These are Islamic values. As well, I like to say that I tell Muslims, you know, in Egypt and in the Arabian Peninsula, this is the century of Islam in the West. You know, Muslims in the West, Muslims have always looked to the Arabian Peninsula with love and reverence and respect, because it's where our Prophet came from, it's where our book came from, it's where our scholars have come from. So we look with respect. But now, you know, there are Muslims in other places in the world who've grown up being used to many Western ideas, you know, of women being educated to a high degree. You know, they've got things to teach the Arabian Peninsula, you know, education and hard work and human rights. Many things that Muslims here, they've grown up with. You know, your kids, your future kids will grow up naturally accepting these things. And you know, you have a lot to offer here to the old Muslim lands, so-called. So there's a lot for Muslims to give, and there's a lot for Muslims to take. As you say, it's a good place to be Muslim, because the infrastructure is good. At times, though, the banging on the head causes the problems.
Thank you very much for your talk, it's really good. So basically, you were talking about how when you went to see the patriarch in Istanbul, like, the PA added you as a Facebook friend. That was like your kind of litmus test of like that you had a good relationship and you built up like amicable relations between each other. Before I came to Cambridge 4 years ago, I didn't have a single non-Muslim Facebook friend, and that's 96% of the British population. 96%, not a single person from there was on my Facebook. And the reason for that is because I was living in the ghetto in Birmingham. And in the ghetto in Birmingham, you don't see a white person, you don't see a non-Muslim person. If they're walking onto your road, people pop their head out the window and think, what on earth is this person doing here? And they must be lost. Unless there's a villa game going on, then it explains it. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is, you can describe this problem, but you don't really give the answer. I feel like it's a self-perpetuating problem. You have, lower socioeconomic people, Muslims, living in these kind of areas, who then statistically go on to do worse in education, who then go on to get those same jobs, and then have children who have the same kind of outlook on life. And then, to make it worse, they get married to people from their home countries, who then come and bring a little bit of Pakistan or a little bit of Bangladesh into their community, and it's self-perpetuating. We've been here for over 3 or 4, 5, 6 decades now. It hasn't fixed. It's not something that is going to fix through generations unless we actively change it. Yes. What I was hoping to hear from you was something kind of, an active kind of advice that we could implement in our communities to change this.
Okay, that's a workshop. Invite me again.
But what would you say in a kind of nutshell?
First thing I'd say is, as Muslims we say, you said this is a self-perpetuating problem. It can never be solved. As Muslims we say, Allahu Akbar. We don't say America al-Akbar. We don't say Al-Fulus al-Akbar. We don't say Britannia al-Akbar. We say Allah, God is the most great. So there is no problem in this world that cannot be solved. That's number one. I don't talk about Egypt, the problems in Egypt, because I'm not a politician. But what Egypt, the recent thing, teaches us is that anything can be achieved. Seemingly insurmountable problems that cannot be solved, like this one. The Berlin Wall fell like that. The Soviet Empire tumbled. Apartheid ended. Who would have believed that apartheid could end? Who would have believed 3 weeks ago? I would have said anyone telling me in Cairo, they were mad. To say that the president would resign in 3 weeks, it was a ridiculous thing to say. As people of faith, we believe that God is in charge. So, brother, there are no insurmountable problems. And as the other thing to say, we really do need a workshop on it. But the thing to say is, in Britain, in the West, I have encountered Muslim communities that are absolutely fantastic, that are better communities than I've seen anywhere in the Arab world. Fantastic. Edinburgh Central Mosque, I'll give us one. Superb. They could teach anyone in the world how to teach people about Islam. Fantastic. And I see, you see, I see the best of Islam wherever I go. So I see in New York, you know, people doing fantastic things. The problem is, you know, Islam has its problems in Britain, or in Tunisia, or in Malaysia, and if you live in those countries, all you see is your own situation. Alhamdulillah, I travel all over and I see Islam. I don't just see the situation of Muslims. And Islam is bigger than any of these countries, you know, and it fills us with great joy. The Maldives, I see the brother from the Maldives, wonderful. Islam in the Maldives, fantastic. So, yeah, there's nothing insurmountable, and there's lots can be done. It starts with education. Education is the key. I find myself choking on the words, repeating them, but education, education, education really is the key, no matter who said it, you know. Very, very important. And when a community invests in its young people, it has a future. And many Muslim communities that don't, they have no future. And you know, in years to come, they'll be known in the mosque. And now they're just old men, you know, and with a few kids sitting at the backboard to death. Well, that will end, you know, just as many churches, you know, there's one person in the church. That is the destiny of many communities unless they invest in the young. In Edinburgh, the thing about Edinburgh is wonderful, really, because the elders of the mosque, the uncles in the mosque, they don't really understand, because they're from different countries, you know, and they don't really understand about letting women come in the mosque uncovered and walk around and learn about Islam. But they've seen there's a certain, that somehow it works. And they've allowed the young people in the mosque to do things that are innovative and creative, even though they don't understand it themselves. So the young people who've done the things in Edinburgh, for example, they're to be commended, but so are the old people who've really taken a big gulp and said, okay, we don't really understand this, we don't like it, to be honest, but we'll let you do it because we can see it works. And people are coming to Islam, they're flocking to Islam, you know, and barriers are coming down all the time. So no, there's no question of it will always stay as it is. It won't come through governments, that's for sure. I mean, when last time I was here, I visited the Cabinet Office, and the nonsense I heard from them, really, of how to solve terrorism and counter-extremism. I said, what on earth are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Your ideas are stupid. So it's not going to come from there. It will come from committed people of all faiths, you know, working together, building, and there are fantastic people of all faiths doing these things. So I'm full of hope. We say Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, not Tony Blair Al-Akbar. He certainly isn't. You know, Allah is the one in control. We've nothing but hope. We have a future that's bright. It may not be orange, but it's bright, you know.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah. Do you know Cambridge University, Islamic Society, we do like a dawah stall at the city centre?
Okay.
So I was doing like voluntary work for them last weekend. And a man came up to me and he had a long discussion about Islam with me. And he asked me a question that he goes that, I've been asked this question from every Muslim he has met. And he goes that, why did you choose to come to the UK? There are other 52 other Islamic countries, why did you come to the UK? I did answer it from my own point of view. I want to know how would you answer such a person? And the second part of the question is, I'm a British national now, and I want to contribute to this community. Such people act like a barrier between me and the British community.
Yes, yes. Okay, first thing is I would say to him, I've chosen to leave this country. I live somewhere else now, you know. I live in Egypt. I wouldn't dream of coming back. You know, I have an affection for here. But if you gave me £1 million, I wouldn't come back. I love it where I am. Because even though I've got no money, and the people I live with haven't got 2 pennies to rub together or shoes on their feet, they walk tall. Poor kids cross the street and they stand up straight like that. You know, people laugh and joke. Do you know when you saw on the television, I'm not delving into politics, when the troubles were going on in Cairo 2 weeks ago, and the police were withdrawn from the streets, that first Monday night, it was very scary because there were guns going off and windows were being kicked in. It was scary. And so the next day, all the local citizens went out at night with knives and sticks guarding the locality. Okay? And down below from where I live, there's a bakery. And there are young lads working in the bakery. They're maybe 17 years old. They're covered in flour. And they haven't got a penny to their name. And they work from early morning to late at night making cheap bread to sell to people. And while the troubles were on, if any strangers were seen in the area or any suspected people were seen, the trick was you'd get your stick and bang it against a pipe. And everyone would hear the banging, we need help. And everyone would run. And I'd hear the banging and look out the window, and these lads down below, they'd pick up their sticks and their knives and they'd go out to protect the citizens, you know? Nothing they could do. There was a gun, there was nothing they could... But there was this sense of community and helping and being a man and being strong, you know? No one ever says to me, am I British or am I Muslim? They wouldn't dare say it. I'd eat them if they dared, because my skin is white. It's got nothing to do with Islam at all. If they say to you, are you British or Muslim, they're being racist. That's all it is. It's nothing to do with your religion. It's to do with where you're from. I can't remember what the question was. But
he asked me that why did I choose to come to the UK?
Okay.
There are two other Islamic countries. So
Okay.
I went to those countries.
okay.
He goes that the reason you came to this country is because Islam's not working anymore. You can't apply such an old religion to a modern society.
I see, I see.
Yeah.
And what would I say to him? Well, I would say, you know, I gave a talk in Malaysia last year, and one sister asked a question. She said, Brother Idris, what's your favourite Muslim country? Because you've been to most of them. What's your favourite Muslim country? Sister, I said, I've never been to one. She didn't know what I meant, you know, and I've been to them all. I've been to countries where Muslims live, but I've not been to a Muslim country. Do you understand what I mean? There's a difference between a country where there are lots of Muslims and a Muslim country where Islam is lived. So, in a sense, he's right. Islam isn't lived in many of these places for various historical reasons. But if you live here, it's your home, and it's no right to... I said to the mayor last night, when the troubles were going on in Cairo, people started pointing to my white skin and saying, look, there's a foreigner. I've never had that before. And she said to me, the mayor said this, she said, this must be how non-white British must feel all the time. And I thought, yeah, it must be. I've never thought of that before. It must be awful when people are pointing to you, look at that one, from wherever. You know, when you're British, really. I met the Lord Mayor of Dublin, and I took with me two sisters. And the Lord Mayor of Dublin was a woman, so I took two girls with me, two Muslim girls, because I thought it was appropriate. And when we had our talk, she talked to the girls, and she said to one of the girls, and where are you from, my dear? And she said, I'm from Clonskea, which is a suburb of Dublin. The mayor was expecting her to say, oh, I'm from Yemen. You know, she said, I'm from Dublin. Dublin, I'm from Dublin. And she said, where are you from? And she was from somewhere else in Ireland as well. So, you know, don't put up with racism, I would say. Don't put up with it. When I come to the UK and I show my passport, sometimes they say, oh, Idris Tawfiq, what kind of a name is that? I say, it's a Muslim name. Do you have a problem with that? Oh, no problem. You know, don't put up with nonsense. Don't put up with it. You know, challenge people back. Don't be like the little dog that runs off, or with your head down. Don't put up with it. Stand tall. You're from Afghan, a proud nation, Afghanistan. Stand tall. Challenge him back. You're British. You've got a British passport. You're as much British as he is. As a final thought, a sister in Canada once said to me, she was of Somali origin, but she was Canadian. She said, Brother Idris, is it okay for us to rock the boat? Sister, I said, it's your boat. Rock it as much as you want. It's your boat. You're not guests here. It's your country. The nation changed when you received British nationality. You know, you're not here as a stranger. It's your country, as much as it is someone who's lived here for 1,000 years. Alhamdulillah.
Thank you firstly to Brother Idris for the amazing talk. Thank you all for coming as well. This talk was part of Experience Islam Week, which will be continuing for the rest of the week. Tomorrow there will be a talk at 7:30 by the authors of the exhibition at the back, exhibition pieces at the back. There's a table of material outside, some of which are free. There are books over here written by Brother Idris and are on sale. Feel free as well to talk to any members of the Islamic Society. All of us are here to talk to you, answer any questions you may have. And we